Imagine after watching Squid Game, you're left to ponder about the state of our society, how the systems in place have left people to basically struggle and barely survive, while the richest 1% owns almost half of the world's resources. And so, you turn off Netflix and leave your house to go to the nearest gardening store, and you pick out a sickle and a hammer. You now feel so motivated and ready to tear down the system for failing humanity. And I'm just joking, obviously. However, I would assume a normal person's reaction to a show that's dark and definitely a critique of a failing in our society, one would, como se dice, be pondering maybe, like trying to intellectualize the content that had just been consumed and be deep, or read more, or consume other media of a similar content, especially with the state of our world being as it is. One would think that that would be the case. One would think. However, you would be wrong. Instead, after watching the show, we have people rushing, scrambling, crawling, and scattering to the nearest online shop to purchase the merchandise and replicate the death scenes in the show.
Jojo! Have you learned nothing?
Hello, and welcome fellow Squidlings to this video. And honestly, I know I was supposed to post this video at least 3 weeks ago, but believe me, I had to scrap the video and refilm it because I kid you not, I sounded like this guy.
The mask is dry off, so now that's so the mask is already.
And judging based on my previous videos where I sounded like I was void of any personality, I decided to refilm it, hoping that I let's just say have personality and I'm able to retain your attention span. Unless you were living under a rock, you would know about the sensation that was the South Korean Netflix show Squid Game, which first premiered in 2021 and recently its second season in December 2024. And I do not know about you, but when I watched the show, I was deeply anxious and afraid of what was going to happen, which is natural because the show is intended to be suspenseful and it is filled with violence and bloodshed. And I'm not the only one, even Netflix thinks so. And a show like Squid Game isn't too far-fetched in its setting, where it's set, for example, in an apocalyptic world or a disease-stricken world, or like is in a totally futuristic or period timeline. Instead, it's set now, in our present. And the problems faced are all too familiar with the general audience. The players experience problems like gambling debt, debts in general, loan sharks threatening them, and my personal favorite, your boss not paying you on time. And so, with a realistic show talking about a realistic systemic problem that we are all realistically experiencing and kind of suffering under, it would make sense that the dark tones of the show would be reflected upon the general reception to the show. Right? Instead, we have this.
I didn't even know she for real knew who I was.
232.
No. Being eliminated this way is extremely disappointing.
Take the you beat me.
Dad's gonna be really proud of you. I'm so glad I played with you. Me too.
Together.
Not to mention an interaction I had with a customer at work where she told me that she watches the show with her children, who looked under 10, mind you. And when I asked if her children were too young to watch the show and that were they afraid, she instead replied that the show was fun. Fun. And thank God I was wearing a mask because I was gobsmacked, to say the least. And I do not know if it's because of the rise of anti-intellectualism and its debate, if you can call it that, or the decline of comprehension skills adult literacy rate, or basically this like mimification of every piece of media where bigotry, hatred, ableism is just not taken seriously, because why should we take it seriously? I mean, in a time where a racist and sexist man was able to get elected the first time round because he got turned into a meme, and history repeating itself, and him getting re-elected because he's an orange man with stiff hair. And I'm here to say that amidst all of these, that no, maybe the curtains were in fact not just blue, okay? It's no coincidence that parts of the show that were mimified or taken as a joke or made into a trend were the colorful, fun, and childish themes and aspects of the show. And it's honestly very jarring to even see brands themselves hop onto the trend, because who is you? And so, in this video, we'll be revisiting how the same colorful, fun, and childish aspects of the show is precisely what ironically elevates the dark themes and horrors of the show. Arguably, the most talked about set would be the colorful flight of stairs. These maze-like stairs are used as a passageway to proceed to the next game venue. The first time we see the stairs, like the players, the audiences are deceived by the brightly colored painted walls. At this point, we are still unaware of what this actual game is about, and the players are not given any indication that their lives are in danger and that this is not a normal game. The design of the staircase was actually inspired by MC Esch's lithograph titled Relativity. The lithograph, which was first printed out in December 1953, depicts a world in which the normal laws of gravity, hint hint, do not apply. And I'm pretty sure the games are illegal, so the laws do not apply. Also, the numerous staircases is meant to create this sense of confusion and uneasiness you would have if you were walking through a maze. And just like the show, the players subsequently, after the first game, as they use the stairs again, they are bound to feel this sense of confusion of what awaits them, in addition to feeling a sense of dread and anxiety, which is elevated with the maze-like structure. An interesting fact I would like to point out is that the figures you see in the lithograph all look the same. They have no faces and also no distinct clothing that separates any of them. And I thought that it was very similar to the image of the guards climbing up the stairs, because if we look at the picture, they too have their faces covered, and also they are wearing the same indistinguishable uniform. And just like the figures, they appear like mindless beings moving about, following orders. However, unlike Relativity, the staircases in the show are filled with color. The use of bright colors ties back to the theme of childhood that is heavily employed in the show, with the show conveying tones such as melancholy, despair, betrayal, and general hopelessness. You would expect the color palette to be deep shades of blue, gray, and black. These colors usually being used to represent dark emotions in art and media. And that's why the pastel pink and green is effective, because it dramatizes the brutality and terror through the contrast of the hee-hee-ho, this is such a fun, unique game show where I can erase all my debt, versus the true, brutal terror and death that comes after. And one more thing, the music that plays during the scene is called the Blue Danube. It is played to indicate the start of a new game, which could also technically mean time for death. And the use of the song to depict incoming death reminded me of a scene from a play called Playing for Time. And in this one scene, the prisoners, who are also musicians, are faced with a moral dilemma to play the song The Blue Danube for the sick patients at the hospital right before they are tragically gassed to death. And I thought that the similarity was interesting to note, where I found the song was used twice to mean incoming death. So I thought it would be interesting to share. Next, we have the dorm. At first glance, it actually doesn't look that interesting as compared to the colored staircases. But if we look closer, we can see that the beds are stacked to look like steps, like ones you would see at a stadium where an event happens in the middle of the arena. And we all know that a certain event does eventually happen in the middle. Initially, the art director Chae Kyung-sun proposed that the dorm should be built to look like a warehouse store. The intention was to present the contestants like objects piled on the warehouse shelves rather than treating them like people. And just like objects at a warehouse waiting to be picked up and delivered to consumers, the players are objectified like packages waiting to be picked up to play to their deaths as a form of personal entertainment for the VIPs, who at this point we do not know exist. In an article from Architizer, it is stated that the dorms are arranged like grandstands similar to the ones at the Colosseum, which isn't too far-fetched to say because if we were to revisit history, although the Colosseum had multiple purposes, the one that it's most famous for is the hosting of combat with gladiators. The games were funded by the emperor and were used to be a source of entertainment for those of lower class in hopes that they would be so entertained that they will totally forget of the raging wealth disparity that's happening outside of the Colosseum, and then they would just forget to rebel. Additionally, the gladiators were usually enslaved people or criminals and mostly fought for the chance to be free of their predicament. Kind of like the players themselves. But of course, after years passed, the games became more grand and more people wanted to train and participate to receive glory and fame. Kind of like in the Hunger Games, certain districts would train the children for the games and they would actually want to be picked to be in the games for the glory. Through the games, we can see the direct contrast with the theme of childhood versus the horrific reality of the games. The pretense of innocence and fun is basically stripped away and instead replaced with human depravity. The first game that we are introduced to is Red Light, Green Light. When the players enter the venue, we see this big-ass girl doll, and she looks cute with her little pigtails and her little dress, and she was intentionally designed to look like one of the characters in a South Korean textbook from the 80s. So again, we see the intention to use nostalgia and childhood as a way to deceive the players into thinking that the games will be fun and easy. And maybe they might even have the chance to win. The venue is also constructed to look like a field in a village where children can run free and play. And all of this ties to creating this false sense of security and fun that the players mistakenly think they are going to have. And all of it is intentional because the art director Chae Kyung-sung herself stated in an article from Variety, oh my god, I can't speak, that they wanted to fill the set for the first game with fantasy and fairy tale-like images. And I think the absence of the city or skyscrapers in the set ties back to this fairy tale-like image because life in a village compared to one in the city is one of leisure, relaxation, presumably, and an overall calmness because you are surrounded by nature. And the theme of nature in art is usually meant to represent calmness and nurture, to name a few. And I'm guessing that the city is going to remind them of their crippling debt and their problems, so the set being void of that further adds to this false sense of security that the players feel. Additionally, the fantasy could be the players thinking that there is a possibility of actually solving their crippling debt by participating in these games with zero consequences. The subsequent games like the Honeycomb and Tug of War are games that children would play at the playground. And the players would have played these games before, which then makes them think that the games are doable and easy. Of course, at this point, the deaths of multiple players have already happened and now the players, or at least a majority of them, are traumatized. And yet, when these simple games are announced, the players are inevitably going to feel this sense of false hope, which then gets violently stripped away from them because we all know that this is not a fine dandy and that you're actually going to die playing these games. First up, we have the players. The players wear a green tracksuit and only that during the entire duration of the game, except for the last 2 rounds. The very famous tracksuit has become one of the identifiers for the show. If you see someone wearing a green suit, you're going to know that they're referring to Squid Game. Cho Sang-kyung, who is the costume designer for the show, was inspired by the tracksuits sold in Korean supply stores and also what children wore during excursions during the 1970s. During an interview with the Korean Jung-ang Daily, she explained further that they decided on a popular green color from the Say Moral movement, which was a political initiative, and the tracksuits children wore on field days at school during the 1970s. She went on to say that the decision may seem retro or kitschy, but they have their own nostalgic charm. And again, we see the intention to employ this nostalgic childhood theme in the show, not just in the set designs, but with the costumes. In the context of South Korea, students at school usually do wear tracksuits during their physical education classes because of its practicality, which also makes sense because most of the games require physical movement. So the choice of the tracksuits helps both the nostalgic and childhood theme, and also because of its practicality. The players' uniforms are pretty much identical to one another except for their numbers. Similar to prisoners, the players do not have a name tag and instead are only identified by their number. Being only identified by a number further adds to the dehumanization of the players. The players, like prisoners, are basically stripped of their identity that they have in the real world to be then replaced by a number in the games. And also wearing the same uniform as basically everyone else helps with the erasure of their individuality that they carry in the real world. Their uniforms and current identities are very similar to one of a prisoner. It can also be assumed that the uniformity of their tracksuits was intentional to further demoralize them and further strip them of their autonomy and reduce them to simply a numbered body. We know this because 1, they are fighting for their lives, but instead it's simply for the VIP's entertainment. And also after their deaths, their bodies are just simply disposed of without any acknowledgement to their families in the real world and simply just disposed like you would do to trash. Abraham Rutchick, an associate professor of psychology at the California State University Northridge, had this to say about the views one would have about the types of clothes people present themselves in to society. He says, "The results showed a shift in those dressed in formal wear towards a more abstract focus, which includes more long-term thinking and being able to delay taking small rewards for larger ones later on. Whereas lower status, casual clothes showed a leaning towards more concrete ideas. In essence, the more powerful the clothing, the more abstract the thinking, and the less powerful the clothing, the more the wearer would not be thinking in broad terms, but focusing on survival and day-to-day issues. It would be logical to conclude that in the case of prisoners who have a total lack of power and vulnerability, this would be even more pronounced." Just like their casual, less powerful tracksuits, the players too are focused on survival and making it through the next game without having other thoughts such as the system of this entire game itself, or even thinking about working together with fellow players to, overthrow the system. We do see their identities being revealed when a player feels connected with another player. The guards' uniforms being pink was decided after the players' tracksuits was going to be green. Pink and green being color opposites on the color wheel is meant to be a visual contrast between the players and the guards, that they are not on the same side, that if the players are the weak ones, the guards are the strong ones. The choice of the costumes being basic colors such as pink and green was intentional, as in an interview, Cho Sang-kyung stated that she proposed the contrast color pink because it was a simpler approach and that a simpler approach sends a stronger message. And we do see the stronger message at play here because with the visual juxtaposition, it reveals the difference between the guards and the players in terms of their statuses in the games. At the beginning of the show, we the audience are unaware of the game makers, and hence our main antagonists are the pink guards. They contrast against the players where the players are completely powerless with nothing to defend themselves and are completely at the whims of the weapons held by the pink guards. There is this immediate conflict of the guards versus the players. To the players, they probably mistake that the difference in colors signaled a better status, and while that is technically true, this audience soon realized that the guards are also just simply cogs in this machine that is this Squid Game. The pink guards have a hierarchy with those at the lower level and others having more power at the top. It is represented with the different symbols. The pink guards are not exempted from death because, just like the players, they can be easily killed for stepping out of line. Apart from the color for the guards' uniforms. Initially, director Huang wanted to play into the childhood aesthetic by having the guards be in Boy Scout uniforms. However, that didn't go through because the short sleeves and short trousers would have exposed their physical bodies, which they did not want. And that is because director Huang wanted the guards to be indistinguishable like ants in a colony, as he would put it during an interview with Netflix Korea. And that's why the famous jumpsuit was chosen, because it evidently covered their entire silhouette from their heads down to their toes, with the addition of the masks. In the players' eyes, they would not know anything about the guards, just that the guards pose an imminent threat to their lives and thus instilling fear into them. And adding on to the ant colony analogy, just as we as humans view all ants to be the same, the players who are outsiders to the game system are unable to differentiate the guards from one another. But of course, as the show progresses, we see that the guards, like ants, have a system where they too have different responsibilities to fulfill. The difference in station among the guards is shown through the symbols on their masks. We see a circle, triangle, and a square, which was probably chosen as the design because, fun fact, the shapes look like the abbreviation of the show's title in Korean. The overall shape of the mask was inspired by fencing masks and traditional Korean masks called ha-ho-tal. Lastly, we have the VIPs. From what we have seen of them, the VIPs have two main pieces of clothing that they wear: tailored suits and detailed embroidered robe. But the focal point of their costumes would be their masks. Similar to both the guards and the players, the VIPs too are unidentified, and we do not know the identities that they have from the real world. But like the guards, their faces are hidden behind a mask, but instead it's a golden bedazzled animal mask. Judging from the background of the room that they are watching the games in, it would seem that the dress code for that particular year was safari themed. I honestly wouldn't put it past the sick heads that they would plan a theme each year for the games. The animal masks we see on each VIPs are an owl, bear, buffalo, eagle, lion, deer, and a tiger. Interesting to note that all these animals can be considered a predator in their respective categories, which obviously fits because they are preying on vulnerable people in society for this sick and twisted game. I do find it interesting that in media, a commonality with the representation of the ultra-wealthy who overindulges, is excessive with everything, over the top with their debauchery and corrupted behavior, is usually portrayed likewise with their over-the-top and excessive, almost inhuman-looking clothing. And because of what I just said, I have to bring up the costume designs in the Hunger Games trilogy. Because why not? If you are unfamiliar with that story, long story short, in the Hunger Games, the citizens of the capital are the wealthiest in the country of Panem, and importantly, they are exempted from the participation of the yearly Hunger Games, where children are forced to fight for their survival. And this privilege and wealth is displayed through their fashion. The capital citizens are known to dress in a grandiose, almost comical sort of fashion. We see this with the character of Effie, who, being from the capital, is our first introduction to what they are like. In the movie, her character is dressed in a purple suit with big ruffles on her shoulders, and she also has pink eyelashes and a pinkish silverish lipstick. In the book, she is described as having pinkish hair and spring green suit. Mind you, she's doing all of this at the reaping. Not a ceremony, but the reaping, where the children and their parents are dreading to hear their own names be called out, knowing that they're probably not going to make it out alive. Her opulent display of wealth through the impractical details and vibrant colors of her clothes is directly contrasted with the impoverished people in District 12, who notably are wearing practical but worn out and washed out neutral colored clothes. Judiana Markowski, the costume designer for the movies, had this to say about the choices made for the clothes worn by the citizens of the capital. These are people who like to watch children beat each other to death in an arena. So it has to be a sort of, not meanness, but we looked a lot at Schiaparelli. She has a sense of humor, but the stuff is beautiful and striking. We looked a lot at Italian fascist architecture that is very imposing. We used a lot of black to break such bright colors. I just thought it would be funny if these people who have such a vicious streak in them are sort of covered in flowers and ruffles. And just like the capital citizens who have too much wealth and resources, who have also become desensitized watching people get killed as if they are watching a fictional TV show or a sports match, the VIPs too have too much money and therefore use their resources to exploit people to become tools for their sick entertainment. We see the use of masks being worn by the ones committing the violence, whether directly or indirectly. Only the players have their faces revealed with no choice given to hide it. The pink guards, on the other hand, are given no choice but to hide their identity. The frontman supposedly isn't supposed to show his face, but I guess it's a fan service? Sorry, I'm just joking. I guess the more power you have, the more you are allowed the choice whether to hide your face or uncover your face. And this makes sense because the VIPs also wear a mask, but we all know it's a decorative piece simply because they want to fit into the theme of the particular year. And then we ask the question, what is the purpose of a mask? First, to put it simply, it hides your identity. You are unable to distinguish one's gender, age, or race, for example, through a hidden face. All of these classifications, if shown, can lead to a possibility of an interaction based on a commonality, possibly even leading to a connection. As such, with a mask on, it eliminates any possibility of a connection, especially between a player and a guard, since they are destined to be against one another, with their colors signifying that divide. And we know that the mask is necessary and intended to hide the guard's identity because we do get to see the consequences of when a guard reveals his identity without permission. We see this in Season 1, Episode 3. In that episode, a pink guard reveals his identity when he is held at gunpoint by a distressed player. And because that player was able to see his face and recognize that the guard in front of him is actually a young man, the player begins to feel conflicted. He felt desperate and was almost going to shoot the guard, yet he now feels sympathy for the guard over his lost youth. The player says, "You are just a kid." He wonders how much society has regressed morally, so much so that a young man who is supposed to have bright dreams and aspirations is now standing here void of any emotions and is participating in the cruelty towards other human beings. And that's precisely what the game makers do not want. They need anyone and everyone below them to be against one another, to not have solidarity. Secondly, with the mask being worn only by the bad guys, it not only keeps their identity anonymous, but also creates a form of escape where they can hide behind the mask without actually having to confront the brutality that they are inflicting onto the players. It's somewhat like their own version of a rose-tinted glass. As they are allowed to keep wearing the mask, it can be assumed that that's where the desensitization to the deaths happens because they're not directly witnessing and therefore confronting their own actions. The mask therefore then becomes a shield for them and protects their conscience. I mean, in Season 2, when the henchman reveals that he initially started off as a guard, we can also assume the process of desensitization happening to him through his constant offing of the players. So much so that when he is faced with his father, he shows no remorse or hesitation and offs him swiftly. It is therefore very interesting to witness how the costumes and games, which were meant to symbolize the cruelty and the oppression of the players, are now being surprisingly very playful and the only takeaway of the show. Emphasis on the word only. And I want to add, there is a reason why the VIPs made the entire killing spree a spectacle and a form of entertainment. It was because it was easier to digest. And similar to the VIPs, the audience digested it way too well. In an article titled "Entertaining Torture and Bodying Law," Peter Hutchings wrote, "Recently, torture has returned to public sight as a mediated spectacle. This mediation of torture effects a disembodiment of torture, one which enables casual violence to occur within a realm in which any distinctions between torture and entertainment seem to have been blurred. He then goes on to say, that is, to the extent that torture becomes a general spectacle or is spectacularized, it is both easier to entertain as an idea and to be experienced as a form of entertainment. That is to say, with the execution of the games in the show, it led to people being able to easily digest the brutal torture of the players and even entertain the idea of replicating it in real life, even though it was the same games where the torture happened. And I'd like to make myself clear, playing these games with your friends, like learning, games from a different culture, is very different to trying to play these games and trying to simulate the exact scenario that happened in the games in real life. Those two are totally different. One is more like a cultural experience, whereas the other one is just you being sick in the head. With that said, with the way people are perceiving and interpreting media and its messages, I think it's very important that we keep being critical and not fall into the trap of, can I just turn my brain off and watch something? Why is everything just being taken so seriously? Maybe the curtains were just blue. And I just want to inform you, because without going too much into detail, that mentality is a beeline to a certain pipeline. And we kind of do not want that in our society. We kind of just want to be more, inclusive. So yeah, we have come to the end of the video, and I would like to say thank you to anyone who watched it till the end. Hopefully, I wasn't too emotional. No, hopefully I wasn't too robotic and void of any emotions. Hopefully, it was entertaining enough to retain your attention for at least the first 2-3 minutes, at least. Okay, at least, because I saw the YouTube studio analytics of my previous videos, and let's just say that I was boring AF. And yes, thank you for watching till the end, and see you next time.